I never thought a pile of gravel would cost someone $23,000, but here we are, standing in my front yard while Patricia Henderson from the Meadowbrook HOA screams at me like I just run over her cat. This is absolutely ridiculous, Luke. You can't seriously expect us to pay this. Patricia waved the invoice I'd sent her perfectly manicured nails catching the afternoon sunlight. Her blonde bob-cut swayed with every indignant shake of her head. I crossed my arms and leaned against my truck. Patricia, I absolutely can and do expect you to pay. Your landscaping crew used my gravel all summer long, every single bit of it. We thought it was community property. It was sitting on my property, in my driveway, with a tarp over it that clearly had my address written on it in permanent marker. The whole mess started back in May, when I'd ordered 15 tons of premium crushed limestone gravel for a major landscaping project I had planned. I live in Meadowbrook, a planned community just outside Austin, Texas, where the HOA thinks they own everything including the air you breathe. I'd moved here 3 years ago, thinking it would be a quiet place to settle down after my divorce. The house was nice, the neighborhood seemed decent, and I didn't think much about the HOA beyond the monthly dues. That was my first mistake. The gravel arrived on a Friday afternoon, dumped right in my extended driveway where I'd requested it. I had the whole summer planned out. I was going to create a beautiful pathway through my backyard, line my garden beds, and create a small patio area near my back fence. The project was my therapy, something to keep me busy on weekends and evenings. I'd even taken measurements, watched YouTube videos, bought all the right tools, but then work happened. My company, a software development firm downtown, had a massive project come through. We were developing a new application for a major client, and I got tapped to lead the team. It meant long hours, weekend work, and basically no personal life for the foreseeable future. My gravel project got put on hold. I covered the pile with a heavy-duty tarp, weighted it down, and wrote my address in huge black letters across it. 4247 Willow Creek Drive, private property. I figured it would sit there until I had time to use it, maybe late summer or early fall. What I didn't count on was Patricia Henderson and her cronies deciding it was communal property. The first time I noticed something was off was in mid-June. I came home late one evening, exhausted from a 14-hour day at the office, and something about my driveway looked different. The tarp was slightly askew, and the pile seemed smaller. I was so tired I figured I was imagining things. Maybe the tarp had shifted in the wind, and the pile just looked different from that angle. 2 weeks later, I knew I wasn't imagining anything. The pile was definitely smaller, not by a little bit either. Maybe a quarter of it was gone. I pulled out my phone and took pictures, measuring the pile from different angles. Then I checked my security camera footage. I'd installed cameras after someone kept leaving passive-aggressive notes about my trash cans being visible from the street. The footage showed exactly what I suspected. The HOA's landscaping crew had been helping themselves to my gravel. The video was crystal clear. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, like clockwork, a truck with Meadowbrook Community Services painted on the side would pull up. 3 workers would load wheelbarrows with my gravel and haul it off to various locations around the neighborhood. They filled in low spots in the community playground. They created borders around the mailbox stations. They even used it to line the drainage ditch near the community center. My gravel, my expensive premium crushed limestone that I'd specifically chosen for its color and quality. I immediately sent an email to Patricia, who was the HOA president, along with video evidence. I kept it professional, assuming this was just a misunderstanding. Dear Patricia, I noticed that the HOA landscaping crew has been using gravel from my personal property. This gravel was purchased for my own landscaping project. Please arrange for it to be returned or replaced immediately. Thank you, Luke Wellington. Her response came 2 hours later. Luke, the crew was under the impression that gravel was part of community supplies. We apologize for the confusion. However, the gravel has already been incorporated into various community projects and cannot be returned. We can offer you a discount on next month's HOA dues as compensation. A discount on my HOA dues for 15 tons of premium gravel. I actually laughed out loud when I read that. I replied immediately, Patricia, that's not acceptable. The gravel cost me $45 per ton plus delivery fees. I need full replacement or monetary compensation. She didn't respond. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks, and you know what happened. The landscaping crew kept using my gravel. I sent another email, then another. I called and left voicemails. I even went to Patricia's house, but she wouldn't answer the door even though I could see her peeking through the curtains. Meanwhile, my gravel pile continued to shrink. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like they were taunting me. I updated my documentation, taking detailed photos and saving all the video footage. I researched the retail price of the gravel, the current delivery fees, everything. By the end of August, my pile was completely gone. 15 tons of premium crushed limestone vanished over 3 months of systematic theft. Because that's what it was. Theft. I contacted a lawyer, Marcus Freeman, who had an office in downtown Austin. He specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. Apparently, he made a good living off it because HOAs in Texas were notorious for overstepping their bounds. This is pretty straightforward, Marcus said after reviewing my documentation. They knowingly took your property after you notified them it was private. The video evidence is excellent, and you have written communication showing they acknowledged taking it. You can sue for the replacement cost plus any additional damages. What would you charge for representation? I asked. For something like this, probably $5,000, maybe more if it goes to actual court. But honestly, Luke, you might want to try one more direct approach first. Send them an invoice. An official, detailed invoice. Include everything. The cost of the gravel at current retail prices, delivery fees, documentation fees, storage fees since they forced you to postpone your project, and your time spent dealing with this. Make it official and give them a deadline. If they don't pay, then we sue. So that's what I did. I spent an entire weekend creating the most detailed, professional invoice imaginable. I researched current prices for premium crushed limestone. They'd gone up since May. I was paying $58 per ton now, not $45. Delivery fees had increased too. I itemized everything. 15 tons of premium crushed limestone at current retail price. $870 per ton for $13,050 total. Delivery fee for 15 tons from the nearest supplier, $2,200. Administrative time, 20 hours at $50 per hour, $1,000. Storage preparation that was wasted, $300. Forced project delay and material cost increases, $2,000. Documentation and evidence compilation, $500. Total, $19,050. I sent it certified mail to Patricia personally, to the HOA board's official address, and I emailed copies to every board member I could find contact information for. That was last week. Patricia showed up at my house within 2 hours of receiving it, which brought us back to her standing in my front yard, screaming, "This is fraud. This is extortion," she yelled, loud enough that neighbors were starting to peek out their windows. It's neither, I said calmly. It's an invoice for materials your crew stole from my property. I have months of video evidence. I have our email correspondence where you admitted your crew took it. I have witnesses who saw them doing it. This is actually me being generous because I could add legal fees on top of this. The board will never approve this payment. Then I'll see you in court, Patricia, and when I win, which I will, you'll be paying my legal fees too. That'll probably add another $10,000 to the total. Your choice. Her face turned an impressive shade of red. This is harassment. I'm going to file a complaint. File whatever you want. You have 30 days to pay or I'm filing a lawsuit. Have a nice day. She stormed off, still clutching my invoice, muttering things I probably wasn't supposed to hear. I watched her Mercedes screech out of my driveway and waved cheerfully. My neighbor, Frank Morrison, walked over once Patricia was gone. He was an older guy, retired military, and he'd lived in Meadowbrook for 15 years. I saw their crew taking your gravel, Frank said. Thought it was weird, but I figured maybe you'd worked something out with them. Did you really? Yeah, want me to write a statement? I know how the HOA operates around here. Patricia thinks she's running a kingdom, not a neighborhood association. A statement would be fantastic, Frank, thank you. Over the next few days, 3 more neighbors approached me with similar offers. Apparently, lots of people had noticed the HOA crew systematically emptying my gravel pile. One neighbor, Sarah Chen, even had her own photos because she'd thought it was strange and documented it. Her pictures were dated and showed the progression of my pile disappearing. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file: videos, photos from multiple sources, written statements, email correspondence, and my invoice. Marcus reviewed it all and whistled. Luke, this is possibly the most well-documented property theft case I've ever seen. If this goes to court, you'll win easily. They might try to argue they thought it was community property, but your emails prove they knew it wasn't and took it anyway. Good, I said. Because Patricia just sent me a letter from the HOA's lawyer threatening to sue me for harassment and filing fraudulent claims. Marcus read the letter and actually laughed. Their lawyer is David Pritchard. I know him. He's going to tell them they don't have a case, and if they insist on pushing this, he'll probably drop them as clients. He's not great, but he's not stupid enough to take a losing case this obvious. So what happens now? We wait. Either they pay or they don't. If they don't, we file suit. Honestly, I'd bet money that Pritchard is already telling them to settle. Marcus was right. 3 days later, I got a call from David Pritchard himself. Mr. Wellington, this is David Pritchard, attorney for the Meadowbrook HOA. I'd like to discuss a settlement regarding your invoice. I'm listening. My clients maintain that this was an honest misunderstanding. However, in the interest of resolving this matter quickly, they're prepared to reimburse you for the original cost of the gravel and delivery. That would be approximately $750 based on your May purchase. I almost laughed. Mr. Pritchard, your clients used my property for 3 months after I explicitly told them it was private. They didn't use it by accident. They used it knowingly and deliberately. I'm not accepting anything less than my full invoice amount. Mr. Wellington, be reasonable. $19,000 for some gravel is excessive. No, it's the current replacement cost plus compensation for the time and money I've spent dealing with this theft. Your clients had multiple opportunities to stop, return it, or replace it. They chose to continue taking it. That's not a misunderstanding. That's intentional. My invoice stands. I'd advise you that litigation would be expensive and time-consuming. I've already consulted with Marcus Freeman, Mr. Pritchard. I'm sure you know him. He seems to think this is a slam-dunk case and that I'll recover legal fees when I win. So really, Litigation would be expensive and time-consuming for your clients, not for me. There was a long pause. I'll speak with my clients. 2 days later, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. I knew because I received a notice that homeowners could attend. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center. I showed up with Marcus, my laptop with all the video evidence and printed copies of everything for anyone who wanted to see it. The community center's meeting room was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the gravel situation, and people were curious. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members. Richard Dalton, vice president, Monica Schultz, treasurer, Dean Park, secretary, and Jennifer Walsh, member at large. They all looked uncomfortable except Patricia, who looked furious. We'll now address the matter of Luke Wellington's claim against the association, Patricia said tightly. Happy to present my evidence, I offered. That won't be necessary, Richard interjected. He was a reasonable guy, an accountant who'd always seemed embarrassed by Patricia's antics. We've reviewed the video evidence and correspondence. The situation is clear. The situation is that Mr. Wellington is trying to extort this community, Patricia snapped. Patricia, please, Monica said softly. She turned to address the room. The board has reviewed this matter. Our landscaping crew did use materials from Mr. Wellington's property. We believed they were community supplies, but Mr. Wellington notified us in June that they were his personal property. At that point, we should have immediately stopped using them and arranged replacement. But we didn't, Richard continued. The crew continued using the materials for another 2 months. That was wrong, and the association is liable. This invoice is outrageous, Patricia said. We're not paying retail prices for gravel we used months ago. I stood up. Patricia, I don't think you understand how replacement costs work. If you steal someone's car in January and they don't get it back until June, you don't get to pay January prices. You pay what it costs to replace it now. The gravel prices went up. That's not my problem, it's yours. You probably made those videos up. Feel free to have them examined by an expert. They're genuine and you know it. I also have statements from 4 neighbors who witnessed your crew taking the gravel, including time-stamped photos from Sarah Chen. This isn't going away, Patricia. You either pay what you owe or I'll sue and add legal fees on top. A man in the back stood up. I'm Jerry Kowalski. I live on Pine Street. I'm wondering how the board let this happen. We pay HOA dues for management, not for the association to steal from homeowners. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Another homeowner stood. I'm Alice Patterson. I want to know if the association's insurance covers this or if this comes out of our reserve funds. Monica flipped through some papers. Our insurance won't cover this because it's considered intentional misuse of property. It would come from reserves. The room erupted. People were angry. The reserve fund was supposed to be for emergencies and major repairs, not for paying settlements because the board screwed up. How much is in the reserves? Someone called out. Approximately $68,000, Monica answered. And you want to pay this guy $19,000 because Patricia couldn't be bothered to buy gravel properly. Jerry again. Now wait a minute, Patricia stood. I was trying to save the association money. The gravel was just sitting there. On private property, Richard said wearily. Patricia, you knew it was his. He told you. You chose to ignore it. This is absurd. I move that we reject this invoice and let him sue if he wants. We can settle for much less in mediation. I move that we pay it and be done, Richard countered. If we litigate, we'll spend $5,000 to $10,000 on legal fees, probably lose anyway, and then have to pay the $19,000 plus his legal fees. We'd be looking at $30,000 total minimum. I second Richard's motion, Dean said quietly. As do I, Monica added. Patricia looked betrayed. Jennifer Walsh, who'd been silent the whole time, shook her head. I'm sorry, Patricia, but this is clear cut. We messed up. We need to pay. Then I call for a vote, Patricia said coldly. All in favor of paying this ridiculous invoice. 4 hands went up. Patricia's stayed down. Motion passes 4-1, Richard announced. Mr. Wellington, you'll have a check within 10 business days. Patricia stood abruptly and walked out of the meeting. The room buzzed with conversation. Several homeowners approached me afterward, apologizing for the board's behavior and thanking me for not letting it slide. Someone needs to stand up to her, Sarah Chen said. She's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for 3 years. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. Well done, son. Well done. I left that meeting feeling vindicated but also a little exhausted. I'd won, but it had taken 4 months of frustration, documentation, and stress. The check arrived 9 days later. $19,050 drawn on the Meadowbrook HOA account, signed by Monica Schultz as treasurer. I deposited it immediately, but the story didn't end there. It never does with HOAs. 2 weeks after the check cleared, I received a notice that the HOA was implementing a new set of rules. Properties could not store building materials, gravel, mulch, or similar items visible from the street for more than 48 hours. Violations would result in fines of $100 per day. It was petty revenge, obviously aimed at me. Except the rule was so poorly written that it affected dozens of homeowners. People who kept bags of mulch on their porches. A guy who'd ordered pavers for a patio project. Someone with a small decorative gravel garden in their front yard. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded. Homeowners were furious, and they knew exactly why the rule had been implemented. Several people called for Patricia's removal from the board. I called Marcus. Can they do this? Technically, yes. HOAs can implement new rules. However, there's usually a process. They need to notify homeowners in advance, allow for comment periods, and vote. If they rushed this through without following their own bylaws, that's a different story. I checked the HOA bylaws, which were available on the community website. Sure enough, new rules required a 30-day notice period before implementation, during which homeowners could submit objections or comments. The rule had been posted on a Friday and was supposedly enforceable the following Monday. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Jerry Kowalski started a petition to recall Patricia from the board. Within a week, he had signatures from over 60% of the homeowners. The bylaws stated that a recall vote could be triggered with signatures from 55% of homeowners. The recall meeting was scheduled for mid-October. I'd ordered a new load of gravel by then, but I made sure to use it all within a weekend, just to avoid any possible drama. My landscaping project was finally underway, and it felt good to actually work with my hands again, creating something beautiful in my backyard. The recall meeting was even more packed than the previous one. Patricia showed up with David Pritchard, which seemed like overkill for an internal HOA matter. Jerry presented the petition signatures. Richard verified them against the homeowner registry. Everything was in order. This is a witch hunt, Patricia declared. I've served this community faithfully for 3 years, and this is how you treat me. Because I made one mistake, you made multiple mistakes, Alice Patterson called out. You used someone's property without permission, continued doing it after being told to stop, refused to make it right, and then implemented a punitive rule to retaliate. That's not leadership. I was trying to save the community money by stealing. Someone else yelled. It wasn't stealing. It was a misunderstanding, Richard stood. Patricia, you and I both know that's not true. Luke told you directly in June that it was his property. You chose to let the crew keep using it because you didn't want to buy gravel. That's not a misunderstanding. That's deliberate. Fine, fine. You want me gone? I'm gone. I resign, effective immediately. Patricia grabbed her bag and stormed out for the second time in a month. This time, David Pritchard followed her, looking embarrassed. The board held a quick reorganization. Richard became president. Monica stayed as treasurer. They appointed Jerry as vice president and started discussing how to repair the association's relationship with the homeowners. One of the first things they did was rescind the material storage rule. Then they reviewed all the other rules Patricia had implemented during her tenure, finding several that had been pushed through without proper process. They rescinded those too. I thought that would be the end of it. Patricia was gone, the board was functional again, and I had my money. I'd completed my landscaping project and my backyard looked amazing. The crushed limestone pathways wound through raised garden beds, and the small patio area I'd created was perfect for morning coffee. But then November came, and with it, a lawsuit. Patricia Henderson filed a personal lawsuit against me for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of reputation. She claimed I'd slandered her character by calling her actions theft, that I'd deliberately inflated my invoice to humiliate her, and that my actions had caused her to lose her position on the board. I was stunned. Marcus was less surprised. Some people can't accept consequences, he said. Don't worry. This is a nuisance suit. Everything you said was true and provable. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. She'll lose, and she might even be sanctioned for filing a frivolous lawsuit. This is going to cost money to defend, though, right? It will, but we can countersue for attorney fees and possibly for malicious prosecution. Let her dig her own grave. The lawsuit dragged on through December and into January. Patricia's attorney, a different lawyer this time, tried to argue that I'd been unnecessarily aggressive in my collection efforts, that I could have accepted the HOA's initial settlement offer, and that I'd intentionally inflamed community sentiment against her. In depositions, Patricia claimed she'd suffered anxiety, insomnia, and had lost friendships because of me. She estimated her damages at $50,000. The case finally went to trial in February. It was held in Travis County District Court in downtown Austin. I'd never been involved in a trial before, and despite Marcus's confidence, I was nervous. Patricia's lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Torres, tried to paint me as vindictive and opportunistic. She pointed out that I'd made a significant profit since my original gravel had cost less than what I'd invoiced for. Mr. Wellington, isn't it true that you paid approximately $750 for the gravel initially, but you invoiced the HOA for over $19,000? Rebecca asked during cross-examination. That's correct, I said calmly, because I had to replace it at current prices, which had gone up. I also included compensation for my time spent dealing with the situation and for the forced delay of my project, which caused additional costs. Isn't that opportunistic, taking advantage of a simple mistake to profit? No, it wasn't a simple mistake. Mrs. Henderson was notified in writing in June that the gravel was my private property. She chose to allow her landscaping crew to continue using it for 2 more months. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. If she'd stopped when I asked, we wouldn't be here. Marcus presented our evidence, the videos, the email exchanges, the witness statements. He showed that everything I'd claimed was factually accurate and provable. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found entirely in my favor. Patricia's lawsuit was dismissed, and the judge ordered her to pay my attorney fees, which had accumulated to just over $8,000. But the judge also did something I hadn't expected. He looked directly at Patricia and said, "Mrs. Henderson, this court finds that your lawsuit was without merit and appears to have been filed as retaliation against Mr. Wellington for exercising his legal rights. You knowingly used his property without permission, refused to make appropriate restitution, and then sued him when he held you accountable. This court does not look favorably upon such behavior. In addition to attorney fees, I'm imposing a sanction of $5,000 for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Consider yourself fortunate that Mr. Wellington's attorney hasn't requested more." Patricia's face went pale. $13,000 in total, on top of the $19,000 the HOA had already paid. As we left the courthouse, Marcus grinned. "That went better than expected. Judges hate it when people use the legal system for revenge." "Is it really over now?" I asked. "It should be. If she appeals, she'll lose and rack up even more costs. If she's smart, she'll cut her losses." Patricia did appeal, but her new attorney withdrew from the case 2 months later. The appeal was dismissed for failure to prosecute. I received my $8,000 in attorney fees by June, almost a full year after the original gravel incident started. But there was one more twist. In August, I received a call from Richard, who was still serving as HOA president. "Luke, I wanted to give you a heads up. We received documentation from the county auditor's office. They're investigating the HOA's finances during Patricia's tenure. Apparently, there were some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that might be criminal." "I can't say more than that, but you might be contacted by investigators since you were involved in the gravel situation." 2 weeks later, a detective from the Travis County Sheriff's Office came to my door. Detective Maria Gonzalez was professional and courteous, explaining that they were investigating potential embezzlement from the HOA funds. "We're looking at the association's financial records from the past 3 years, she explained. "Your situation with the gravel helped trigger the audit. When the board paid out $19,000 from reserves, the treasurer decided to do a comprehensive review. They found discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" "I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation, but let's just say the gravel wasn't the only thing Mrs. Henderson was helping herself to. We might need you to testify about your interactions with her, the timeline of events, and the payments." Over the next few months, the investigation unfolded. It turned out Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses for over 2 years. She'd been clever about it, disguising the expenses as legitimate community costs. Landscaping supplies that never materialized, maintenance work that was never done, legal fees for consultations that never happened. The total was estimated at over $75,000. In November, Patricia Henderson was arrested and charged with embezzlement, theft, and fraudulent reporting. The local news covered it briefly. I was contacted by a reporter who'd heard about the gravel incident and wanted to know if it was connected. "It started with gravel," I told her. "Just a pile of gravel that she thought she could take without consequence. I guess she'd been getting away with taking things that weren't hers for a while." The story ran in the Austin American-Statesman with the headline, "HOA President's Downfall Started with Gravel Theft." It detailed the whole saga, from the initial taking of my gravel to the embezzlement charges. Patricia's trial happened the following spring. I testified about my interactions with her, the emails, and her refusal to make appropriate restitution. The prosecution used it to establish a pattern of behavior. Patricia Henderson believed she was entitled to use association resources however she wanted, regardless of rules or ownership. She was convicted on multiple counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband filed for divorce during the trial. The Meadowbrook HOA, under Richard's leadership, implemented new financial controls, regular audits, and transparency measures. They published monthly financial statements and held quarterly town halls where homeowners could ask questions. I stayed in my house, enjoying my completed landscaping project. The crushed limestone pathways had settled beautifully, and the plants I'd put in the raised beds were thriving. Sometimes, when I was sitting on my back patio with morning coffee, I'd think about how a simple pile of gravel had ended up exposing major corruption and sending someone to prison. Frank stopped by one Saturday morning while I was working in my garden. "You know, Luke, you did this community a real service. If you hadn't stood your ground over that gravel, Patricia would probably still be stealing from us." "I just wanted to be compensated for my property," I said. "I didn't expect any of the rest of it. That's usually how it works. You pull on one thread and the whole thing unravels. How's your project turned out? See for yourself." I gave him the tour. The winding pathways, the raised beds with vegetables and herbs, the small patio with comfortable chairs, and even a fire pit I'd added. Everything was lined and bordered with that premium crushed limestone, looking exactly how I'd envisioned it. "Beautiful work," Frank said. "Was it worth $19,000? I laughed. The gravel itself wasn't worth $19,000. Standing up to someone who thought they could take whatever they wanted. That was priceless. The neighborhood had changed too. Homeowners were more engaged, attending board meetings and actually reading the financial statements. Several new people joined the board, bringing fresh perspectives. The community felt more like an actual community and less like Patricia's personal kingdom. I did eventually use every bit of that second load of gravel for additional projects. I helped my neighbor Sarah create a pathway in her yard. I contributed materials when the HOA did a legitimate community project to improve the playground. And I still had enough left for my own ongoing projects. One afternoon in late summer, almost 2 years after the initial incident, I was sitting on my patio when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Wellington. This is Angela Phillips from Channel 8 News. We're doing a segment on HOA abuses and reform in Texas. Your case has been cited in several proposed pieces of legislation. Would you be willing to do an interview?" Apparently, my situation had caught the attention of state legislators who were pushing for HOA reform laws. They wanted to implement better oversight, financial transparency requirements, and stronger protections for homeowners against retaliatory actions. I did the interview. It aired during the evening news, and I explained the whole situation. How it started with gravel, how the HOA refused to take responsibility, and how standing firm had eventually exposed much larger problems. "What would you say to other homeowners dealing with HOA issues?" Angela asked. "Document everything," I said. "Take pictures, save emails, record conversations if your state allows it. Know your rights and your HOA's bylaws. And don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even over something that seems small. Sometimes small things are symptoms of bigger problems." The segment went viral locally. I got messages from dozens of people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to vent. A few were dealing with situations similar to mine, where HOAs had overstepped their authority. I connected several people with Marcus, who was happy to take on more HOA cases. He later told me that the gravel case had become something of a legend in property law circles, used as a teaching example of how proper documentation and standing firm on principles can lead to justice. The proposed legislation passed the following year. The new law required HOAs in Texas to undergo annual independent audits, publish detailed financial statements quarterly, maintain minimum liability insurance, and follow strict procedures before implementing new rules or fees. It also made retaliatory actions by HOA boards explicitly illegal and gave homeowners a clear path to seek damages. They called it the Homeowner Protection Act, though some people jokingly referred to it as the gravel law. I framed a copy of the bill and hung it in my home office, right next to a photo of my completed landscaping project. 3 years after everything started, I was doing yard work when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, looking around the neighborhood with that expression people get when they're house hunting. "Excuse me," the woman called. "Do you live here?" "I do," I said, walking over. "We're thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood. How's the HOA?" I smiled. "You know, it's actually pretty good now. They're transparent, responsive, and respectful of homeowners' rights. It wasn't always that way, but things changed." "Changed how?" the man asked. "Let me tell you about a pile of gravel," I said. I gave them the short version of the story. They listened with widening eyes. "So you're the guy," the woman said. "We read about this when we were researching the neighborhood. That's actually why we're interested. We figured any community that went through that kind of reform and came out better was probably a good place to live." They ended up buying a house 2 streets over. I saw them at HOA meetings, actively engaged and asking good questions. They told me later that they'd specifically looked for a home in Meadowbrook because of how the community had handled and learned from the Patricia Henderson situation. That was perhaps the most surprising outcome of everything. The neighborhood's reputation hadn't been damaged by the scandal. Instead, it had become known as a place that held people accountable, fixed problems, and protected homeowners' rights. Property values had actually increased. Richard served another 2 years as HOA president before stepping down, satisfied that he'd helped restore integrity to the association. Jerry took over after that, continuing the transparent and respectful approach to community management. I stayed involved, attending most meetings and serving on a committee that reviewed proposed rule changes. I figured if I'd gone through all that trouble to reform the HOA, I should help make sure it stayed reformed. My landscaping project expanded over the years. I added more pathways, created a larger patio area, and even built a small pond with a waterfall. Every bit of it featured that crushed limestone, a constant reminder of where it all started. People in the neighborhood would sometimes joke about it. "Better not leave anything in your driveway, or Luke will send you an invoice." It was all good-natured, and I took it in stride. I'd become the guy who'd stood up to the HOA and won, and honestly, there were worse reputations to have. 5 years after the initial incident, Patricia Henderson was released from prison after serving 2 years of her 3-year sentence. I heard she'd moved to a different state, probably wanting to start over somewhere people didn't know her story. I didn't have any ill will toward her by then. She'd made bad choices, faced consequences, and hopefully learned from them. The whole situation had worked out better than I could have hoped. I'd gotten compensation for my property, helped reform an abusive system, and ended up with a beautiful yard I genuinely loved. The gravel pile that started everything was long gone, transformed into pathways and borders and decorative elements throughout my property and beyond. But its impact remained, rippling out far beyond one driveway in one neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I just let it go. If I'd accepted Patricia's offer of a discount on HOA dues and moved on, the embezzlement would have continued. The HOA would have remained dysfunctional. The community would have kept suffering under poor leadership. all because of a pile of gravel and one person's belief that they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. I learned something important through all of it. Standing up for yourself matters. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. When you let small injustices slide, you enable larger ones. When you hold people accountable for minor wrongs, you sometimes prevent major ones. My property values increased, my neighborhood improved, and I got a beautiful yard out of the deal. But more than that, I'd helped create positive change that would benefit hundreds of families for years to come. And it all started with a pile of gravel, a persistent HOA president who thought rules didn't apply to her, and one guy who decided to send an invoice. The story became something I'd tell at dinner parties when conversation lagged. People were always fascinated by how something so simple had escalated so dramatically and ended with actual criminal charges. They'd ask questions about the legal process, about dealing with the HOA, about whether I'd known it would blow up the way it did. The answer was always no. I just wanted my gravel replaced. Everything else was consequence and discovery, one thing leading to another in ways I never could have predicted. Frank Morrison passed away a few years after everything concluded, but before he did, he told me he was proud of what I'd done. "You reminded people that standing up for what's right matters," he said. "Even when it's hard, even when it's just gravel." I thought about that a lot. It really was just gravel, crushed limestone, useful for landscaping but not inherently valuable. Yet it had become a symbol of something larger: the importance of property rights, personal accountability, and refusing to let authority figures abuse their power. My back patio became a gathering place for neighborhood friends. We'd have summer barbecues, fall bonfires, and spring garden parties. People would admire the landscaping, and someone would inevitably bring up the story. "This is the famous gravel," they'd say, gesturing at the pathways. "It is," I'd confirm. "Most expensive gravel in Texas, probably." And we'd laugh, enjoying the beautiful space that had been created through such an unlikely and complicated journey. The crushed limestone remained perfect through all seasons, requiring minimal maintenance. It drained well during Texas storms, stayed cool enough to walk on during hot summers, and provided exactly the aesthetic I'd wanted. Every time I looked at it, I felt satisfaction not just in how it looked, but in what it represented. Those pathways were built on principle. Those borders were lined with accountability. That patio was paved with justice. It sounds dramatic when I put it that way, but it was true. The physical materials might have been just gravel, but they'd been purchased with money I'd rightfully claimed, in a process that had exposed corruption and led to meaningful reform. Years later, I still lived in that house on Willow Creek Drive. The HOA continued to function well under new leadership. The neighborhood remained a pleasant place to live, and my yard, with its winding crushed limestone pathways, beautiful raised beds, and comfortable patio, was exactly what I'd envisioned when I first ordered that gravel all those years ago. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply insisting on fairness, documenting everything carefully, and refusing to back down when you're in the right. The consequences follow naturally from there. I never regretted sending that invoice. Not when Patricia showed up screaming in my yard, not during the depositions and trials, not even when the whole thing became a media story. Because at the end of the day, I'd done exactly what needed to be done. I'd stood my ground, defended my property, and demanded appropriate compensation. Everything else that followed, all the discoveries and reforms and consequences, those were just the natural results of shining light into dark corners. And I had a beautiful backyard to show for it. Every pathway and border a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing, even over something as simple as gravel, can lead to outcomes far more significant than you ever imagined. That pile of gravel had cost Patricia Henderson her position, her reputation, her freedom, and nearly $100,000 in restitution and fees. It had cost the HOA $19,000 plus the expense of implementing new oversight systems. It had cost me time, stress, and legal fees, though I'd been reimbursed for the latter. But it had given the community accountability, transparency, and better governance. It had given me a beautiful yard and a sense of satisfaction. It had given other homeowners courage to stand up for their own rights. Fair trade, I thought, sitting on my patio one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink above my perfectly landscaped backyard. Fair trade indeed.